Office, Julia Kulik, Research Officer of the same office, our long-standing database manager, Rod Mitchell, our statistician, Galila Tillahun, and our longtime office manager, now retired, Gillian Long. Several decades ago, I obtained from the British Library a microfilm of the Great Cartulary of the Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem for England. It contains some 3,000 acts, largely property exchange documents or charters. I published over 1,200 of them the old-fashioned way. That is, as printed books. The print run was, I believe, 500 in number. There are approximately 1,400 such books of deeds recorded in the British Isles, hundreds of which have been edited by competent historians and archivists and published in one form or another, for better or for worse, by national, county, or other such societies. An advantage, of course, is that with the distribution of printed versions, the need to see a unique, often fragile manuscript is considerably reduced, and researchers with access to library holdings can read from the edition without the challenge of dealing with the paleography of the original. Increasingly, these editions are being made available online, thus further enhancing their distribution around the globe. Simultaneously, images of the originals are also being uploaded to the internet, providing thereby the means for interested parties to check the accuracy of their printed editions if they so wish. Such verification is indeed in order, for no matter how experienced the editor, multiple errors invariably find their way into the printed version, leaving the reader with the editor's view of the document and the editor's view alone. That view will often include standardization of orthography, the exclusion of supposedly repetitive parts, the misreading of the text, and the erroneous expansion of abbreviations. This situation is deeply compromising for virtually the entire printed historical record upon which we are all dependent today. For England especially, there is the additional problem of establishing an accurate chronological record. As anyone who has worked with English property transfer documents from the 240-year period between the conquest and the early 14th century will know, more than 97% were issued without dates. Perhaps 2% of these can be precisely dated from the content of the act, while 3% actually have embedded dates. What does this say about the chronological reliability of the overwhelming majority without dates? Members of the DEEDS project at the University of Toronto have invested many hours over the years searching through printed editions for dated charters issued before 1307, the beginning of the reign of Edward II, after which most charters are dated. By so doing, we have assembled some 17,000 records, largely dated internally, to within a year of issue. Statistical algorithms applied to the millions of consecutive two-word patterns occurring in this corpus have been developed by statistician Dr. Galila Tillahun at the University of Toronto in order to attribute dates to undated documents of this type, dates which have proven to be accurate to within plus or minus 7 years. As dated material is added to the database, that range should continue to narrow. At the moment, the DEEDS database contains the texts of approximately 55,000 charters, of which about 10,000 each from France and Austria, and the rest from England. As individual charters or cartulary copies thereof, corresponding to what we have in the database, become available online, a major objective will be to link our transcripts to them. As a consequence, the researcher cum paleographer will be able to judge the accuracy of the transcription. This endeavor is also what has led us to the subject of handwritten text recognition software, or HTR, in the name of Transkribus. We believe this approach to the transcription of medieval handwritten text is the way of the future, not only for archivists and historians, but for all medievalists who deal with Latin text. To train the software to read the wide range of extant texts, however, the preparation of a considerable amount of ground truth will be required for each discipline. Our entry into this marathon is with legal documents, specifically charters. There are millions of them available, and as they are digitized, first through scanning and then through HTR, our approach to the larger historical patterns which can be ascertained from them will be greatly enhanced through topic modeling and other means of technical analysis. The lone charter, viewed together with nearly 1 million Latin charters currently available online from England, France, and German-speaking lands, has entered the realm of big data, and from there can speak with a different historical tongue from what we have been used to. I'd just like to introduce our audience to a few of the possibilities currently offered by the DEEDS database. DEEDS enables one to search any word string of reasonable length across the database and to plot the results. If we take the phrase found in the initial diplomatic address, Francis et Anglicis, French and English, we obtain a total of 1,210 documents, or 10 occurrences derived from documents issued in England. Taking a sample of 100 of these from our concordance program, we arrive at a date range of, for them of 1066 to 1204, which is indicative since King John lost Normandy in 1204, and knights and barons who held property in both England and France had to choose between the King of England and the King of France as their lord. So Francis, in this context, disappears thereafter from the charter formula. A search on several forms, or a series of forms of the phrase Francis et Anglicis, as you see here, provides the chart before you. The red on the bar chart designates the number of occurrences of the phrase relative to all words in the database for a given year. The post-1204 outliers, which you see in the central and lower chart, turn out to be 12th century documents embedded in 13th century confirmations. Taking as an example from the same list of charters, we will attempt to attribute a date to a document to which a relatively long date range has been given by its editor. That is DEEDS document number 1670034, which you see highlighted towards the bottom of your screen. This is from the Ridwar cartulary, and it contains the expression Francis et Anglicis, but bears the editor's date of circa 1200 to 1240. The issuer, William of Ferrers, has been identified by the editor as the 4th Earl of Derby. Dropping the document into the DEEDS dater gives a different picture from that provided by the editor. The dater algorithms point rather to 1165 or the period of William of Ferrers, the 3rd Earl of Derby, who died in 1189. That date is also consistent with the occurrence in the document of the address to Francis et Anglicis, which we know virtually disappears after 1204. As another example, I'd like to take the phrases Sancte Mariae and Beate Mariae and compare them. Both are used continuously throughout our period, but upon the death of King John in 1216, or was it a result of the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, Beate Mariae becomes the preferred form for the rest of the century. I have no explanation as yet for this change, but topic modeling may help us identify the answer. By way of a conclusion, let me add that DEEDS plans to make its HTR model available to other scholars through Transkribus so that they can transcribe their own charters using our hard-won ground truth. Individual users will have to make their own adjustments. But with multiple contributors adding an ever-growing range of source materials, the end result will become increasingly accurate and useful. For this, we all thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much, Michael, and good evening, everyone. I'm Philip Schofield, and I'm supposed to be chairing this event. And alas, technical problems in my home here meant that I couldn't be with you right at the start. But anyway, those are sorted out. And I was going to start off by, thanking various people who've made this initiative possible. So I'll proceed as though I'm at the beginning of the event, and of course, so let me just welcome everyone to the launch of the UCL-Toronto Transkribus model for the reading of medieval Latin documents. And on behalf of the Toronto team and the team at UCL, we'd like to thank both our universities for providing the funding which has made this initiative possible. We'd also like to thank, in particular, Christchurch College Library and the Bodleian Library at Oxford for providing us with high quality images at a crucial moment in the development of this this model. And finally, thanks to Gunther Mühlberger and his team at the University of Innsbruck, who for both their technical support and advice, and of course for the Transcribers platform itself. Professor Mühlberger is the genius behind the Transcribers initiative. And just to remind you that for those of you who wish to use Transcribers yourself and have a go with with your own documents, Dr. Chris Riley will be leading a training session in 1 week's time. So same time, same place in 1 week. And as you've heard, Professor Michael Gervers give the first presentation on the DEEDS project. I don't know, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of the presentation, but Michael set up the DEEDS project way back in the mid-1970s. And he's Professor of History in the Department of Historical and Cultural Studies at the University of Toronto at Scarborough, where he teaches history and art history, and has published numerous books and articles on medieval history, art history and archaeology, and on textile history and ethnography. And as you've heard, Michael has explained the DEEDS project. And we're next going to move to my colleague at the Bentham Project, Dr. Tim Causer, who's a senior researcher at the Bentham Project. And his background is in Australian penal history. And together, we've recently worked on a new edition of Bentham's writings on Australia. Tim originally joined the Bentham Project in order to work on Bentham's writings on Australia. He originally joined the Bentham Project to work on Transcribe Bentham, our scholarly crowdsourcing initiative, and then went on to work on the Transcriptorium program, which was the forerunner for Transcribers. And Tim will talk about the Bentham Project and Transcribe Bentham. Then we'll get to the business end of the meeting, so to speak, and Hannah Lloyd, who's a PhD student in history at Yale University, where she's focusing on late medieval food and medicine, but she's been involved in the DEEDS Transcribers project since 2017, and today she'll make a presentation on the formative stages of this project, focusing on the early experiments with digital charter transcription and the challenges encountered in this process. Then we'll move on to Dr. Chris Riley, who's a researcher at the Bentham Project. He's recently completed his doctorate on Bentham's concept of history and has published articles on Bentham's legal thought. But for the last couple of years, he's maintained the Transcribe Bentham platform and is an expert, as we shall see, in the use of the Transcribers platform. and Chris will explain how the initial results from the use of the Transcribers platform were improved. And then we'll move to Dr. Ariella Elema, who's a legal historian and archivist. She received her PhD from the University of Toronto's Centre for Medieval Studies, where she studied Latin paleography and wrote a dissertation on trial by combat. And in 2018, she earned a master's degree in library and information science and now works in archives, as well as consulting on projects in legal history. Ariella will explain how the new Transcribers model was created, and then we'll finally return to Chris to give us the results which those improvements have achieved. And so that will hopefully be the climax of our presentations. So we should finish the presentations by about 7-ish UK time, 2 o'clock, I guess, in Toronto, and then there'll be time for questions and answers. And I think Tim's already explained the way the question and answers will operate. So anytime you wish, please add your questions to the question and answer forum. Okay, Tim, let's move on to you now and hear your presentation, please.
Share my screen. Okay. Thank you very much. Jeremy Bentham, the philosopher and reformer born in London in 1748 who died there in 1832, is perhaps best known for 2 things. First, for his panopticon penitentiary scheme, which you can see a plan of here, or perhaps Michel Foucault's interpretation of it and an adaptation of it as a metaphor for the surveillance imposed by modern societies upon their citizens. Bentham had imagined his prison as a humane and efficient alternative to the grim English prison system. And it would have consisted, as you can see, of a central inspection tower with the cells arranged around the circular outer wall. And the prisoners would be able to see into the tower, but couldn't see it. So the inspector could see into the cells, but the prisoners couldn't see the inspector in the tower, and so had to assume they were being watched at all times. And Bentham thought this would lead them to modify their behaviour to become honest, hard-working citizens. And this central inspection principle, as Bentham termed it, he thought would be applicable to any institutional setting where surveillance was required. And Bentham spent about 12 long, dispiriting years trying to persuade the British government to build a panopticon, but despite legislation being passed which authorised it, it was never built. The second thing is Bentham's auto-icon or self-image. Bentham, who didn't believe in God and for whom the body was just a wondrous machine to be understood, had requested in his earliest will, made just aged 21, that his remains were to be dissected in order to benefit medical science. And in his last will and testament, he went even further, requesting that after being publicly dissected, his skeleton then be put together, dressed in his own clothes, and, as he put it, seated in a chair usually occupied by me when living, in the attitude in which I am sitting when engaged in thought. And Bentham's wishes were duly carried out by his friend, Dr. Thomas Southwood Smith, and 18 years later, in 1850, the auto-icon came to UCL, and it's now been on public display for several decades. But the panopticon and the auto-icon can, however, tend to obscure Bentham's importance. His thought and works have had a major historical impact and are still of significance today. Bentham was the founder of the modern doctrine of utilitarianism. That is, that an action is right if it increases happiness, as a critical standard by which to judge laws, institutions, and other practices. Bentham advocated female suffrage, was a proponent of sexual liberty, and wrote on topics including the punishment and reform of criminals, political economy, religion, and he was a major theorist of representative democracy. And he's also responsible for coining everyday words that we still use today, such as international, minimize, and maximize. These originate with Bentham. Anti-gentacular circumgyration, that is going for a pre-breakfast jog has not fallen into common usage, unsurprisingly. In 1959, the Bentham Project was established at UCL to produce the new authoritative edition of the collected works of Jeremy Bentham, of which to date 34 of a projected 80 volumes have been published. The edition is based on works Bentham published in his lifetime, as well as upon works and partial works found in his unpublished manuscripts. The Bentham Papers consists of around 85,000 manuscript pages held by UCL Libraries Special Collections, and a further 15,000 pages of manuscript at the British Library. Producing the collected works might seem a Sisyphean task. So in 2010, about 28,000 of these 100,000 pages of manuscript had been transcribed, and at that rate, it would have taken till at least 2081 until the transcription of the manuscripts was complete. So to try and accelerate the rate of transcription and the production of the collected works, in September 2010, the Bentham Project launched its now award-winning scholarly crowdsourcing initiative, Transcribe Bentham, which has recruited volunteers from around the world to transcribe Bentham's manuscripts. That Transcribe Bentham is still going 11 years, almost 11 years after it started, is doubly remarkable in my eyes. First, because digital humanities projects often have a limited and transitory nature owing to short-term grant funding. And second, that Transcribe Bentham was an experiment that we had no idea whether it would work or not, and indeed, in its first 4 months, looked like it might well fail. When Transcribe Bentham launched, scholarly crowdsourcing projects were generally few in number and typically asked volunteers to carry out repetitive micro-tasks to generate research data or enhance publicly available resources. So volunteers recruited by the famous Galaxy Zoo project, for instance, were asked to classify the shape and colour of thousands of images of galaxies, while the National Library of Australia asked volunteers to correct OCR-produced transcripts of historic newspapers. There has subsequently been something of an explosion in crowdsourced transcription projects, such as Micropasts, What's on the Menu, Criminal Characters, and the Letters of 1916 to 1923 project. But these projects typically ask volunteers to transcribe manuscripts which are fairly short or have been of a fairly standard layout, such as a pro forma form with text handwritten information added to it. But I think even now, a decade on, the Transcribe Bentham remains, I think, among the most demanding, if not the most demanding, scholarly crowdsourcing project in terms of the task it asks of its volunteers, in that they're asked to carry out 2 interconnected tasks. So first, to transcribe a page at a time 18th and 19th century manuscripts of often considerable complexity, and second, to encode those transcripts in text encoding initiative compliant XML. And what you see here are examples from the Bentham Papers of varying degrees of legibility, complicated by deletions and interlineations, marginalia, and much more besides. And no page is the same as the last. And in addition to all these problems, volunteers are also facing Bentham's challenging ideas and idiosyncratic style. But what all these pages have in common is that they've been transcribed to a very high standard by volunteer transcribers. And one volunteer even transcribed this manuscript, which I always like to show as a sort of how remarkable the accuracy and level of works that Transcribe Bentham volunteers give to the project. The transcripts produced for Transcribe Bentham through the transcription desk, the platform, serve 2 key purposes. So those of sufficient quality are uploaded to UCL Library's digital Bentham Papers repository alongside the respective manuscript images to create a searchable database of the Bentham Papers. While these draft transcripts are also used as a starting point by editors of future collected works volumes, so volunteers are contributing to the production of humanities research rather than merely consuming it. Transcribe Bentham, as Philip said, is currently coordinated by our colleague Dr Chris Riley, who you'll hear from shortly. But as of today, about 26,000 manuscript pages have been transcribed or partially transcribed to this really high standard by volunteers, and this is an estimated 11 million words, including TEI markup. And if volunteers continue transcribing at the rate that they are at the moment, then the entirety of the Bentham papers could be fully transcribed later this decade, which was an inconceivable thought back in 2010. And in addition, Transcribe Bentham also promises the Bentham Project longer-term efficiency. So, for instance, the volume of Bentham's writings on Australia that Philip and I have edited, having available about 60% of draft transcripts of about 60% of the relevant manuscripts for that volume, probably saved about 6 months of my time, which was redirected into other editorial tasks. Among the many unforeseen consequences of Transcribe Bentham's success was an invitation in December 2012 to take part in a consortium of computer scientists, computational linguists, archive and information services professionals, and humanities scholars who plan to apply to the European Commission for funding to develop tools for the indexing, searching, and transcription by computers of historic manuscripts using handwritten text recognition technology, document image analysis, keyword spotting, other technologies. This transcriptorium program was funded from 2013 to 2015, and its successor project, Retrieval and Enrichment of Archival Documents, also known as READ, funded from 2016 to 2019, developed and integrated these technologies into the wonderful Transkribus client, which we'll see more of shortly. And with this, you can create your own language model or use an already available one to recognize handwritten material from any period written in innumerable languages and styles with sufficient training data. The result being that vast collections of historical material can now be automatically transcribed, searched by institutions, researchers and the general public, potentially transforming how we access our printed heritage. The most important question is, of course, the accuracy of HTR, which will be discussed in the medieval Latin context very shortly. The digitized Bentham papers and their transcripts were crucial to developing and testing the technology during the two projects. Those complex manuscripts you saw earlier contain any or all of the features that any effective HTR system needs to solve and contend with. But yes, at the start of the Transcriptorium project, early experiments were producing results where 82% of the characters on any given page were correctly recognised, whereas at the end of the READ project, up to 95% of the characters on a page were correctly recognised. And you'll hear in a moment about some of the rather striking results of the experiments with the Latin manuscripts. One of our long-term goals, depending on resources, would be to incorporate the HTR technology into Transcribe Bentham, so uniting manual crowdsourcing with the HTR technology. So users of varying capabilities or with varying amounts of disposable free time could then be supported by the technology. Rather than transcribe a page from scratch, a volunteer might request an automated transcript from the system to correct against the original manuscript, while someone transcribing from scratch who might get stuck on a word or a phrase could ask the HTR engine for suggestions as to what those missing words might be. So to very quickly sum up, Transcribe Bentham and crowdsourcing more generally would, we hope, have met with Bentham's approval through the initiative's use of technology to democratise the creation of and access to knowledge and research, and to enable this work to be done in as efficient and cost-effective a way as possible. Many hands make light work, wrote Bentham in 1783, but many hands together make merry work. And I think this collaboration is a similar instance of many hands making merry work. So I'll stop there and hand back over to Philip. That's all right.
Okay, thanks very much, Tim. And you begin to get a sense of how of where we're going with this in terms of the collaboration between the two projects. So without further ado, let's move on to Hannah for her presentation.
Hi, thanks, Philip. Good afternoon or good evening to everyone. I'll just be sharing my screen. Sorry, just give me a second. Sorry, it's not allowing me to view my PowerPoint. I think it's just an error on my computer. Sorry, hold on 1 second. Ah, there it is. So, during my time as an undergraduate and master's student at University of Toronto, I had the pleasure of working with Professor Michael Gervers on a project which I now continue in to a much smaller degree, which was the process of digitizing paleography, transcribing Latin charters with Transkribus. So what I'll mostly be focusing on today is our work with this software prior to our involvement with the Bentham Project, which my colleague Chris will then go into further detail on and express just the monumental strides that were achieved once we collaborated with them. So firstly, I'll be going through a very brief overview of our corpora, as well as Transcribus itself, the challenges and successes we've encountered, as well as our future directions, which we're still hoping for with this project. So first, I'm giving you here the name of the project as it's listed under its SSHRC funding, text as image as text, charter integrity, and talk modeling. So the process of digitalization and automated transcription is just one part of a larger project, which Michael is currently working on, which ultimately aims to, as he explained in his presentation, utilize vast quantities of big data to analyze and interpret information with regards to dating, as well as basically a myriad of other applications. So as Michael also mentioned, DEEDS, it has an enormous corpus of documents, 55,000 charter transcriptions. And these, for the most part, are English charters written in Latin, dating from around the time of the conquest to the 15th century. While our ultimate goal would be to develop an HTR model with the capacity to transcribe any medieval Latin text, for our present project, we are restricting ourselves to the charters, which have a limited vocabulary and a relatively consistent structure, which further enables speedy transcription, at the very least, from the human perspective. This makes them an excellent source both for accurate machine transcription and for talk modeling, with the important benefit that the transcriptions available through DEEDS enable us to train the software much more efficiently, because for many of these documents, we already have transcriptions. We don't have to be doing the process of preparing original transcriptions. Although, as Ariella will acknowledge in her presentation, there are challenges to working with previous editions. In order to produce a universal HTR model for English Latin charters, I had been using the program Transcribus to generate ground truth and build models for temporally disparate cartularies, two processes which I'll explain further after first outlining Transcribus itself very briefly. So Transcribus, it's a multinational platform based originally from the University of Innsbruck, and it was part of the READ project and was funded through the European Union, and has now become an independent cooperative. So Transcribus is not only for Latin charters, as Tim alluded, it can be used for any script, really. Largely the Romantic scripts were its initial focus, but now it's expanding into basically global as well as temporally wide range of scripts, as well as working with charts and numerical data, transcribing those sort of forms. Transcribus enables scholars to digitally tag and transcribe documents in order to build ground truth and generate unique HTR models. It also has a keyword spotting tool, which can enable text mining even on untranscribed documents. But for our primary focus during my part in this this organization, it was to build a ground truth specifically for a group of charters. So our first step was to identify the most suitable document set based on their presence in the DEEDS database, accessibility to images or high quality microfilm of the charters themselves, and the number of charters composed in the same hand. Although we were open to testing transcription models on individual idiosyncratic charters, for the purpose of building initial models, we did seek cartularies with consistent handwriting, which are fortunately very plentiful due to the monastic custom of preparing by one scribe or one group of scribes a copy of their selection of charters. So most of the time, these corpora will just be in one hand, which is obviously very useful for our purposes. So once identified, in the case of microfilm, the images were scanned to a digital format, and then the training process in Transcribus began. Generating ground truth is a very straightforward process through Transcribus. First, images are uploaded to Transcribus, then text regions and baselines are mapped onto each image, either automatically by the program or manually. I personally find it, because of the extraneous text that's often present in many different medieval documents, I find it much easier to do the text regions myself, as you see here, just outlining the sections. So for instance, the text at the top, Maple Trustede, you would not want to have transcribed for this ground truth, so it's easy to just highlight what you do want to process. Then automated baselines can be applied. Generally speaking, these are very accurate. This is a monumental improvement in the last several years of Transcribus' development, whereby you do not have to individually use a baseline. You can just run the program and it should mark everything up, although you can always change this manually if there are issues. And all these steps I'm describing, Chris will be going into much further detail in his presentation next week. Then you upload your transcription line by line. There is a text to image function in Transcribus, but I generally find it more effective to just simply copy and paste line by line, just because the text image isn't always reliable for ascribing the correct line of transcription to the correct image of that transcription. But that is also something that's been improving. As you can imagine, the manual processing of folio pages can be rather tedious, and at the initial stages of this project was one of our greatest demands of time. However, for building the ground truth itself and playing around with different models, these are processes that largely rely on the tech itself, and so there's less human time being put into it. So I initially created 3 models for the Texas Image Project based on over 300 folios. The first model is based on charters from the cartulary of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem Prima, dated 1442 to 1447, Cotton Euro 86. The second is built on ground truth from the early charters of the Cathedral Church of St. Paul, London, begun 1241, as you can see the St. Paul's Cathedral movements. And the third model was developed from a combination of ground truth data from both cartularies. The first 2 models show moderate success on their own charters. However, for instance, testing the Knights St. John cartulary with its own model, there was a word error rate of 14.9 and character error of 11.7. And although more recent tests have shown CER as low as 4%. St. Paul, by contrast, had a word error rate of 33 and a character error rate of 13.8. Although, again, some pages had much more successful character error rate of only 8%. We had speculated at the time that the higher accuracy of the Knights of St. John may have been due to the greater quantity of ground truth used to train the model. However, then when we experimented testing these 2 different models on their contrasting material, so St. John on St. Paul and vice versa, we found massive word and character error rates, which were indicative that something needed to be changed and that a model tailored to one particular script would not be successful on a substantially different script. Then I created a combined model based on an equal amount of ground truth from both of these cartularies, which had significantly better results, as you can see, still substantial word and character error rates, but drastically lower based on the individual models. And here is a chart just expressing these changes over time. This is a very positive indication despite the higher character error rate for the hopes of a universal charter model, one which could be based on a variety of hands and capable of transcribing any of them. However, there are still many models and much ground truth to be generated before the viability of a universal model can be determined, which is something that Chris will be expanding on further. So briefly, I'm going to go through our challenges and successes. So the greatest challenge with automated transcription of Latin charters is that of abbreviations. These charters, as many legal Latin texts at the time were, heavily abbreviated, often with the number of abbreviated words exceeding those in their full form. The Transcribus software largely learns by individual character-to-character recognition, so training a model to match a short abbreviation to a much longer word, while also retaining an understanding of the individual letters inevitably led to many errors. This is especially a large problem due to the grammatical importance of endings of Latin nouns and verbs. So, for example, a mistranscribed ending will result in a completely different meaning to the sentence beyond simply, for example, a spelling error. Some of the solutions that have been proposed for this thus far have been tagging words with an add-on to indicate abbreviations, or using character symbols, which can be expanded using a macro, the latter of which Chris will touch on. Both options, however, do rely on post-processing and create greater difficulty for a proofreader, problems which do render even digital transcription quite a substantially time-consuming process. Further challenge that we have encountered is a recurring issue with recognizing line breaks, where the program struggles to recognize that one individual word might be broken up over 2 lines, and usually it overcompensates and creates both of these into completely different words. Similarly, a challenge that many other scripts encounter as well, which is just simply character similarity. So for instance, the vowels A, E, and U are often mistranscribed quite easily, and I for O. However, what we found in general was that our models seem to favor A when the vowel is uncertain, which is something that can be factored into post-processing. Similarly, N and M, and vice versa, but this is, again, a very minor problem. Generally, it doesn't obscure understanding of a text. However, it does boost up the character error rate. There's also issues, of course, with letters which different editors might transcribe differently. For instance, the U's and V's as well as I's and J's. However, as Ariella will touch on, there is now a way to indicate that some character variability can be acceptable and not factored into a higher character error rate. So in that sense, sometimes the word error rate and character rate can misrepresent the model's accuracy as inferior to its actual abilities, because a statistically strict approach to correct versus incorrect text differs substantially from what anyone experienced with Latin reading can recognize as minor idiosyncrasies and changes within text. So in that sense, these word and character rates can be viewed a bit more positively than they currently are. However, as Chris will expand on, there are many improvements that we've recently encountered. Our future directions, I'll go over some of sort of the broader ones. It's our main objective in the coming months to resolve the issue of abbreviations, which Chris has been working on prodigiously. And if Transcribers continues to be viable, we'll continue to make different models, which Ariella will touch on, with widely differing hands, and which will hopefully demonstrate a vastly improved, what could be considered a general model for any hand. Also, one thing that we haven't really continued with, but we were considering temporarily, was the exploration of grammar trees and teaching the ground model to process grammar to a degree, but that isn't a direction that we have continued with thus far. So there are many applications for this project that should be successful. As I've previously acknowledged, as have my other presenters, the generation of large quantities of text searchable charter content will enable our project and other scholars to implement topic modeling to discern linguistic and historical changes from the documents. The existing DEEDS database has been a valuable corpus for early experiments in topic modeling, but automated transcription would allow help modeling text even further. it's also possible that eventually there will be a universal, I apologize for the sirens, that a universal model could be created which would revolutionize the field of medieval studies with increased accessibility to documents and improved digital research techniques for scholars. While my work with Transcribes is just a small step towards this goal, I hope that future endeavors, both by Texas Image and other projects such as our Bentham collaboration, will further the pursuit of automated transcription for handwritten Latin texts. So that's all for me. I unfortunately will not be able to stick around for the entire Q&A period, so if anyone has questions pertaining to my section, you're more than welcome to email me. I just have my email on the screen here. And thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much to you, Hannah. And okay, without again, let's move on now to Chris for the first part of his presentation, and this is where we get technical, I think.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So yeah, I'll go ahead and share the screen 1 second. Okay. Hoping that's working now. So yes, prior to the commencement of the project, as Hannah has just described, attempts to generate HTR models within Transkribus in the hope that they would be able to process material from the DEEDS corpus were not entirely successful and yielded some quite high character error rates and word error rates on the first sort of phase of experimentation. The word error rates for these models prior to the award of funding reached around sort of 54% on average, and the character error rates around 25%. Although, as Hannah did explain, these also included kind of where one model was applied to the material that was used to generate a different model. And this kind of made them far from ideal for research purposes. So we set out to expand and refine the ground truth and create some further models in order to bring these percentages down substantially, preferably to below 10% if possible, in order to make the use of HTR a viable alternative to the often costly use of human transcription by individuals in possession of the relevant Latin and paleographical skills. So the initial data set with which we began was composed of 272 pages with their corresponding transcripts from the DEEDS corpus, which represented around 10,000 lines of text in total to begin with. The first step was to go through the existing collections from the DEEDS corpus on Transkribus in order to improve all the text regions and baselines which the software program had added to the manuscripts through its layout analysis tool. This was to ensure that all text was included in the text regions and all baselines covered every part of the words on each line, as any errors here might have caused some reductions in the pre-project character error rate and word error rates. At this time, the text was also checked and corrected with line breaks being amended and the little signifying symbols being added wherever necessary, and also any commonly occurring abbreviations being noted for later on, given that one of our objectives was to process often quite abbreviation-heavy Latin script. I was supposed to show some earlier slides. So that's just Hannah showed those to the earlier results. So once this had been completed, experimentation began with further model creation to try and improve on our pre-project results. And 4 models were created during this phase, with the results being very promising compared to those achieved earlier, with a minor exception or 2. So our first model achieved a character error rate on its trained set of 4.818% and on its validation set of 5.56%. I should add at this stage that the train set that I'll be referring to is kind of the bulk of the material used, and then the validation set is the smaller allocation that's set aside for training purposes during the model creation phase. And that was comprised of around 126,000 words. The second model had a very good character error rate on its train set of 0.78, but the character error rate on the validation set was 14.25. I think there's some kind of user error, probably on my behalf, in terms of allocating the validation set, and also this was a much smaller model in total, around 40,000 words. So the third model was then created, again, still kind of experimenting around at this point, which achieved 1.90% character error rate on its train set and 2.23 on its validation set. And this was a much larger model than the preceding one, so 135,190 words. And then the final model at this point was the fourth, which achieved a character error on its train set of 1.34 and 1.47 on the validation set. This was around 116,000 words. So in an attempt to get these percentages down further and to make them more consistent and to essentially see what we could do, we utilized two different scripts. These are both developed very kindly by Ismail Prada, a programmer from Switzerland, who's incredibly helped throughout the project. So thank you to him. So in order to use these, we created an abbreviation dictionary consisting of over 100 abbreviated Latin words, both in their expanded and their contracted forms, in which the latter were represented by compatible special characters that, wherever possible, best reflected how they appeared on the page. These abbreviations were also categorized in the first instance as either prefixes, suffixes, or just standalone abbreviations, which would then alter how they would be processed by the algorithms when they were run. So the first of the two scripts you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, and there's a GitHub link as well if you wanted to try it out for yourself. It comes with a little README file that explains how to use it. And essentially a little Python script with a simple user interface, and the user interface is the section on the right of the two. The one on the left is just the code. And then into the user interface, the user will paste data from the XML viewer within Transkribus, which the script then, when it's run, consults against a user-defined tab delineated file or a TSV file, which you can run in Excel or various other software programs. And when it is run, the script kind of finds any expanded words appearing in the XML data, replaces them with a contracted version found in this the special TSV file, and then applies the abbreviation tags surrounding every instance of these words in the specific page on Transkribus. As this was very new to us, this whole process and the creation of an abbreviation dictionary and special character set with which it was compatible was at times very problematic, with multiple versions of the appropriated tab-separated file containing the abbreviated words, and several varieties of special characters being experimented with in an attempt to get it to function as intended. After some trial and error, we were kind of forced to do some of the finding and replacing without the use of the script, even though it was extremely promising. And around a third of the words were manually processed in this way, wherever they appeared in each folio, and then tagged accordingly throughout our original ground truth. But this process was very time consuming, sometimes owing to the search function within Transkribus is sometimes a little bit awkward, at least in my experience, in navigating large pages of results. This script then, which we had a substantial number of problems with, sometimes attributable to our use of Windows 10 rather than Linux, or Excel rather than something like Microsoft Visual Code, and then certain special characters were throwing up a few errors, was also slightly imperfect in how it would have operated had we got it to work correctly. As already alluded to, one had to run it for each and every XML file saved through Transkribus and copy and paste the data back and forth for each manuscript page composing the ground truth. So given that manually finding, replacing all abbreviated words through Transkribus and tagging them accordingly at this stage was very time intensive for us, it was enormously helpful that at this stage, Ismail not only clarified the correct use of the script for us and kindly had a look at our abbreviation dictionary on our behalf, but he developed an API equivalent that permitted the processing of transcripts en masse. You can see this on the right-hand side. So with the new script, everything is done by connecting directly to Transkribus itself. After you give it the collection editor's username and password and the collection ID, with the formats of the abbreviation dictionary itself remaining the same as in the earlier version. It's much simpler to use. So you run a basic command, and you can see the text that you have to insert on the right here. with the sections of text in angled brackets being what you specifically enter yourselves. This is not currently on GitHub, but he did indicate that he would upload that in the future. It probably would be interesting doing so if there was enough interest to it. So once the script had been run, the latter of the two, the API version, over 100 abbreviations from our dictionary were incorporated into the transcripts for the existing 270 plus pages almost immediately, before we managed to create an impressive fifth model. So for our fifth model, we got a character error rate on the train set of 0.93 and a very slightly lower validation set character error rate of 0.92%. And this was a kind of similar number of words, maybe sort of 500 or so more than the fourth model, at 116,000 words. So in testing a fifth model on material from the DEEDS corpus, this model achieved character error rates that were 13.7% lower and word error rates that were enormous, 37% lower than the average figures which we'd achieved before the project began, and far below the ideal threshold of 10%, which we were aiming towards. So having achieved some very promising results from this fifth model, we set out to test it on some additional material outside the DEEDS corpus, namely some material from the British Library and then some from the National Archives. With the British Library material, we had some issues. I think these were related largely to image quality. With the National Archives material, our best performing folios had really good rather good character error rates of 8.82%, 9.13%, not ideal, but much better than the word error rates that it came back with, which were in the region of sort of 27, 28%, which is not really very acceptable. At this point, we managed to bring this down quite a lot for the by using our final model, which I'll introduce a bit later. We managed to get the character error rates by using that model down to 3.9, and we kind of slashed the word error rates in half to 15%. That one, but I'll talk about our latest model in a moment. So at this point, we made the decision to try our latest model on the instruments and Freud's-wide cartularies held by the Bodleian, having gratefully received some high-quality TIFF files of the manuscripts from each from Christ Church College, Oxford. But as the initial testing results could have been better, with them sort of indicating a bit too much of a dissimilarity between the original DEEDS material and that of the instruments and Freud's-wide cartularies, we decided to incorporate the 125 or so folios we managed to obtain into our ground truth in the hope of better preparing it to process a broader range of documents. The issue we faced at this point, however, was the available transcripts of the instruments and Freud's-wide material, which had to be checked closely against the manuscripts for accuracy before text-to-image matching could take place. And in the process of doing so, we uncovered some quite serious textual issues. For instance, some of the lines of St. Freud's-wide had been transcribed with one letter representing each word with spaces in between, which made it almost unusable for the purpose of expanding the ground truth, which is what we'd intended to do, at least without a more expert eye, at least more expert than mine, to go through and correct the Latin. To this end, Ariella, to whom I will now hand over to discuss her methodology and any challenges she faced, kindly agreed to go through and correct the text. So I'll hand over to Ariella to discuss that, and then I'll come back.
Sorry, just before Ariella starts, it might be worth, we've had a question about how character error rate and word error rates are calculated, and Tim, you're going to respond to that, and that might be helpful before we move on.
As far as I'm aware, I think the Transcribus produces these figures for us, as we can see in Chris's slide here, and because it's based on, as I understand it, manuscripts which we already have transcripts of, we can measure the that baseline against the test run with the HTR model, which I think that's the system that it uses. If that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Tim. I think that's you already have you test it against the ground truth, which you already have, and so you can calculate it and on that basis. So you already know what the transcript is, and then you do a comparison. Chris might give more details in due course, but let's move on to Ariella and hear her. About her involvement in improving the model.
Thank you very much, Philip. And I'll just share my screen here. There we go. I think you can all see that. So my part of the project consisted of creating and cleaning up transcripts of the 2 cartularies that were suitable for training the machine reading software. Once we had obtained high-res images of the manuscripts from the Bodleian Library and set them up in Transkribus, as Hannah described, then we needed a transcript of the text. In the most recent stage of the project, we were working with the cartularies of Eynsham Abbey and the Priory of St. Frideswyde in Oxford. Part of the reason why these 2 cartularies were chosen was because editions of the text already exist in the public domain. The Eynsham cartulary was published by Herbert Salter in 1907, and St. Frideswyde was edited by the Reverend Spencer Robert Wigram and published in 1895. Both of these cartularies are digitized along with their metadata in the DEEDS project database, where you can read the charters online as digital text, and you can also see images of the pages as, or you can also see the pages as images. So I already had the text of these cartularies to work with. The challenge for this project was that the text of an edition is not exactly identical to the text in the manuscript. My job was to take all the good work that the editors had done to produce a readable edition and undo it. In Transkribus, I turned the edited text back into a paleographical transcription, line by line. For instance, one of the issues I encountered was that the editors often decided to save some space by skipping the repetitive parts of the charters. So what read as omnibus, etc. in an edition would turn out to be omnibus Christi fidelibus ad quos presens scriptum pervenit in the manuscript. So I had to expand that every single time. What I also found was that the editors had standardized the Latin orthography in the edition. I had to keep an eye out for medieval spelling in the manuscript and change the transcript accordingly. In the process, I discovered that the spelling of Eynsham itself changed partway through the cartulary. Up until about 1242, it was spelled Egnesham with a G, but thereafter it was spelled Eynsham, or Einesham with a Y. The edition spells it with a G throughout the entire book. Small details like this are very useful to the DEEDS project because they help us to date undated charters. Some aspects of the orthography I did not have to change. Transkribus does not distinguish between the letters I and J or U and V when it is performing its transcriptions. So in that regard, I was able to simply leave in place all the spelling conventions that the editors had used. And here we have 24th, number 24 with an O. And universis, I didn't have to decide whether that V in the middle of the word is a U or a V. I just left it as the editor left it. I did have to keep an eye out for idiosyncratic capitalization. Medieval clerks like to capitalize a lot of words that would not be capitalized in an edition today. You may have heard of the high medieval satirical text, The Gospel According to Marks of Silver, Well, in the ancient cartulary, Marcae Argenti is often, though not always, capitalized, as if it's a name. Or we have another word here, salutem, salt. Somehow the first two letters were capitalized and the rest are not. Transkribus is case sensitive, so I had to make the transcript reflect what was written in the manuscript. You may have noticed that there are a lot of abbreviations in Latin charters, even in the few words I've put on the slides so far. Fortunately, one of the good things about this software is that it can learn to recognize basic abbreviations. It's capable of learning that one symbol can represent up to about 3, sometimes even 4 letters. This meant that I could leave simple abbreviations expanded in the text, which saves a lot of work. I could also represent the text with the standard Roman alphabet without having to worry about additional character sets. So here we have some more examples from the manuscripts. We have per, pro, and pre, and quad, et, est. All of these abbreviations occur quite often. And here are some examples of short abbreviations that could be left expanded in the transcript. Ecclesiam, contingerit, conventus, and nostrorum. The last one is pushing Transkribus's capabilities a little bit, but it occurs numerous times, so the software has lots of examples to learn from. Some of the abbreviations are too complex for Transkribus to decipher on its own, and in these cases, I shortened the word in the Transkribus transcript to reflect the letters that were present in the manuscript. And as Chris was describing, it's possible to tag these words in Transkribus to flag them as abbreviations. And with those tags, you can teach the software to expand them. So for example, you can teach it that epus, E-P-U-S, represents episcopus, or bishop. The problem is that sometimes you get an abbreviation like suk, which can mean, sometimes it can mean successoribus, successors to the successors, for the successors, but sometimes exactly the same abbreviation means successores, which is the plural accusative. So you cannot actually teach Transkribus Latin yet. And at some point it may be able to make guesses about the right expansion based on statistics. I made a spreadsheet of all the key complex abbreviations in each cartulary for Chris, who did all the tagging. Between them, the two spreadsheets had over 600 entries. And this is, of course, a very small selection of the many, many, many abbreviations that you find in a Latin charter. However, it's a base upon which we hope to build. So once we had a body of transcriptions to work with, it was time to let the software render it all down and see what it cooked up. And Chris will explain what happened next. Thank you. Over to you, Chris.
That's great. Thank you, Ariella. So yeah, if you unshare yours, then I can share mine, hopefully.
There we go.
Okay, and hopefully you can now see that. So after Ariella very kindly finished checking the text of the two cartularies and after a list of abbreviations was compiled, a further 2 models, the ones that we'd already created, were generated. And we perhaps would have stuck with one, but one had a very high error in the validation set, so we redid it essentially. So what you can see now is the figures for our sixth attempt at model creation, which achieved a character error rate on its trained set of 1.72%, but a very high 7.53% validation set character error rate. And that was around sort of 150,500 words essentially. Not entirely happy with this character error rate of the validation set, just kind of reassigned that allocated portion of the manuscripts, and then generated what is now essentially our final, perhaps our final model, at least our last one for the time being, and managed to gets a character error rate on its train set of 1.39%, and on the validation set, much lower than 7.5% of 0.80%. And that was slightly smaller owing to the fact that we'd used a slightly different portion of the ground truth for the validation set. And so finally, after these two models had been created, we did some testing, both on the two contributors from Oxford, with which we'd expanded our original ground truth, and on the original collections on Transcribers, of which that ground truth had been created. So on the former, the Oxford material, the results were good. So Frieswide, we achieved a character error rate on the train set of 6.28% and on the validation set of 7.45%. And on Insham, we achieved a character error rate on the train set of 5.89%, and then on the validation set, kind of creeping up a little bit again, of 13.68%. This is not perfect, particularly the validation character error rate for Insham, but far better than what we'd achieved before we'd attained the high quality images of the stuff from Christchurch College, and before Ariella had gone through and corrected the text. And these figures, however, were not quite as promising when compared to some of those achieved when creating discrete smaller models unique to each of these two contributories without borrowing elements from the collections that we had used to generate models 1 to 5. So just for the purpose of comparison, we just created just a small model for essentially the ground truth that we had for St. Frieswide model, and then tested it, which gave character error rates that were a little bit better, not a huge amount better, sort of 1.93%. A word error rate that was 0.03% worse. It's not really that much worse, but I thought it would be worth mentioning. And then for the discrete smaller Insham model, the character error rates were just under 3% better if we just use the smaller model dedicated to that individual collection. But yeah, largely owing to the higher word error rate that we received when using the 7th model on Insham, using the discrete model, the smaller dedicated one, the word error rates was a good sort of 7.5% better. Most importantly, though, the expansion of our ground truth with the material from Oxford and the creation of our 7th model did improve our results on material from the DEEDS corpus when compared to anything that we've been able to achieve by using our first 5 models, which were created exclusive with DEEDS manuscripts, giving final figures for testing on average across all our collections of 0.53% character error rate and 1.06 word error rate. So if you'd like to use our 7th and final model, I'm told it's now publicly available through Transcribus, so if not, it will be in the following few days. If you do give it a try, please get in touch and let us know what results you've managed to achieve or any feedback that you have. We'd be extremely, extremely grateful. So yes, thank you. I think my colleagues and I would take some questions.
Thanks very much indeed, Chris, and thanks to everybody for their presentations. Just to reiterate, our 7th model, our UCL-Toronto model, is now available on Transcribers. So if you have images you would like to test, you can join the Transcribers platform. I think it's free to individuals and up to a certain limit. Thereafter, there is a modest charge, but it is a fantastic resource and deserves support. And so you can upload images into the Transcribers, choose our UCL-Toronto model, and see what results you get. So the basic process is join the Transcribers community, upload your images, get the baseline format with the baselines, and then use our model to generate your text. And that makes it sound very straightforward. But Chris will give a detailed training session, as we said, next week at 6 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Toronto time. And I think, you know, the key lesson is that you need decent quality images and get the baselines accurate. And in terms of the images, if you have your own Latin manuscripts lying around and you want to photograph them, the Transcribers people have developed a marvelous device called the Scan Tent, whereby you can download an app to your phone and then take photographs with you move the page and the app recognizes the movement. You take your hands out of the Scan Tent, it takes a photograph, you make another movement, move your hands away, and it takes another photograph, and so on. And that's a particularly excellent way of generating images at a very low cost. For how many librarians will allow you to mess about with their cartularies like that, I don't know. But the possibilities are for anyone who wishes to use it. Now we've got some questions coming up, and so first question, probably for Chris. What's the name of the model in Transkribus?
The model just has the catchy title of UCL dash the University of Toronto number 7.
Okay, and another question is, have we anywhere described the methodology we use for the transcriptions in detail?
No, not yet. Transcribus has some PDFs on its website about transcription conventions, but I was actually thinking that perhaps we should draw up a document creating some conventions for Latin transcription.
Okay, and so we have the question about does the format of the digital image matter for uploading to Transcribers?
Yeah, quite significantly. As long as they're a decent resolution, there's probably some guidance on the Transcribers website about the kind of exact dimensions and number of pixels. But some of the kind of lowest and most disappointing results were when we were trying to test on material that was for which we couldn't obtain high quality images. So yes, it does matter. Yes, just the best you can get really. You don't have to use sort of enormous sort of TIFF files with huge amount of megabytes. You get to use the different type of file types. But yes, it will affect the results if the image is too pixelated for the software to read.
Right, yes, so I think the less is the better quality image, the better the quality of the result. But I remember when we were involved in the Transcribers program, it was, you know, said that 300 psi, for instance, was adequate. So what you can get on a decent camera camera on your phone is good enough. Would be good enough, Chris. Does that make sense?
It might be, yes. I would, if you're using your phone, I would pay attention to make sure the setting on your phone is safe to sort of high resolution as it will do, and try not to use it in kind of a low light environment, because that would lead to pixelization, which would yeah, again lower your results if it was too dark to be able to determine the features of the document.
Oh, and Gunter's, in answer to the previous question, just mentioned that it's UCL-University of Toronto number 7 is the name of the program on the Transcribers website. Tim, you want to respond to that? Oh no, okay. The top question there, are we in contact with other teams working on medieval Latin? Jan, who's asked this question, says they have seen some quite different approaches and would be fascinated to compare the results and methodologies. I mean, we're not in contact with other people, but I think Michael, there are people you're in touch with.
Yes, there are a number of people who are working on machine transcription. And I think the next stage is that we band together and see if we can do some kind of a composite, which I expect will lead to improvement on all sides. But there's definitely, there are a number of approaches. Transcribus doesn't have to be the only one. But as I said, I think by combining them, we will undoubtedly triumph over the major problem of machine transcription of medieval handwriting.
Right, thank you. And the question here about that an archive has high quality TIFFs of the charter, and can these be uploaded or should they use JPEGs?
If you have TIFF files, that's fantastic. Yeah, I would go with those over the JPEGs.
Right, yeah, use the TIFFs. A question from Cynthia: does the model recognize different hands?
As long as the script is more or less similar, it should be able to process it without much problems. We haven't really done too much testing, but that'd be very interesting to give it a go with some extra material. Perhaps if people give the model a try on some kind of analogous material from a similar period that's in a different hand, and if you can let us know the results, that would be great. But yes, not at this stage have we tried it on.
Yes,
a specific result, I don't think Ms. Ariella can.
Yeah, the ancient cartulary is in a number of different hands, though they're all more or less the same script. So there are some different hands in the model, but they're all very similar. I'm not sure how well the model works on completely different scripts.
Okay, thank you. And have we tested the model on non-charter text yet? For example, legal treatises or texts with similar content but which are less formulaic? No, we haven't, I don't think. No, but that's certainly something that's worth a try. Court records and whatever. And in terms, another question, this is from Joe, in terms of using a phone to capture document images, you could use the DocScan app, ScanTent, other products which help with uploading materials to the platform. This is from somebody who's at Reed, and sorry for the product placement, but thanks for the presentation. Yeah, so what I was saying earlier about DocScan app and ScanTent, terrific. It's true. I guess you'll find that on the web, and it is a terrific little device. It's sort of a tent with lights built in, and you put your documents in between. There's a place to put the phone on the top and take the photos. Another question from Jan. We've talked about the character error rate, but actually because you automatically transcribe text with abbreviations, you may expand them later automatically wrongly, like the mentioned different cases. What is then the error rate in the resulting documents, and how readable are they? Yeah, so the question then is, do we wrongly automatically expand them, and does that affect the, if we take abbreviations, are they also, wrongly expanded, and if so, would that show up in the character error rate? And
I'd actually like to go through the results with Chris at some point, and just compare the character error rate that Transkribus produced with what we actually know about the Latin text, and double check that.
Okay, and I mean, in terms of the readability, we generally reckon if you get a character error rate of under 10%, it's readable. And Okay, somebody would like to know whether the fee for using Transcribus is affordable for a student. I know Gunter's online, so maybe if he would send me some, so I'm not sure what the pricing policy is, but I think it's available on the website, and there might be special deal for students. So we'll check that out. But Gunter has just sent a comment about the earlier question, I think, in relation to other Latin models. He says there's a similar initiative to ours at Innsbruck called Nocimus, and they have a public Transcribus model which reads Latin printed documents very well, and also Greek text. And it handles the abbreviations in the same way as the UCL-Toronto model. Question from William: what proportion of our deeds record, your deeds records are ecclesiastical, such as episcopal acta? That's a question for Michael.
The cartularies are for the most part made up by religious houses. However, I would say the great majority of the content represents property transfer between any group. Sometimes you're dealing with two people, but the people involved will be more frequently lay folk than they will be ecclesiastics.
Okay, Gunter sent the link to the Nocimus project. So I don't know, Tim, if we can share that. Yeah, great. Nice comment from Sarah White. Thank you very much. The project is fascinating, and we all owe you a debt for the work you've put into this. Thank you. Well, thanks, Sarah. Peter asks, are the abbreviations part of the model? If not, are they available publicly? Chris, I think you better answer, maybe.
I think this is, it's just the model itself rather than the training data, but we can certainly look into make them available too. I wouldn't see why we wouldn't have to do that.
Okay. Sorry, where are we up to? How can something like an electronic Capelli or even a Latin word list from a dictionary help? Compare with the incorporating of Latin and Greek dictionaries to the Diogenes project of texts. So this is an idea stroke question from Renan, asking whether an electronic Capelli. Sorry, I don't understand. I'm not being a Latinist. I don't understand this.
Okay, yeah, Capelli wrote a dictionary of Latin abbreviations, and I think his dictionary covers a number of different centuries and different hands and different kingdoms. And for the moment, as I understand it, we're training our model just based on the abbreviations found in these cartularies from England from this particular time period. But possibly as we expand the model, Capelli is maybe one of the places we could go to help. Certainly it helps the transcriber create the ground truth.
Okay, thanks, Ariella. And a note from the University of Guelph to say that they're going to check out the model on Transcribers. And Joe from the READ project from Transcribers itself says that in answer to the earlier question about the cost for students, apparently students, there's a student exemption, says Joe. So I guess that means that students can use the platform without paying any subscription. And another question from Jan about, are we planning to release the model for eScriptorium? It would be very interesting to compare different technologies. I don't know about eScriptorium. Do you, Chris, or Tim, or anyone else?
No, I'm not too familiar with it, especially not in terms of kind of exporting models from one to another. I wasn't sure that was possible, but certainly interesting to look into that.
I certainly think it's something that we should do.
Okay, yeah, well, thanks for that. Thanks for that suggestion. As you can see, this has been very much an experiment and very much the start of what could be a very well, already is a very exciting development, but could lead on to much greater and better things in terms of developing a more universal model that will read medieval Latin. Would be a tremendous boon to scholarship, I imagine. Although not being a Latinist myself, I should leave that for others to decide. But no, I'm sure it will be. So okay. We have another comment here. Does Transcribers format the transcriptions automatically, or do you check each document and change its layout, etc., if necessary? Thinking of tables, for instance. Now, that's a good question. I mean, I'll start. Yeah, there is a very good automatic method of formatting the transcriptions. But Ariella, is this or Chris? You've looked into that. You know more about this than I do.
Yes, Transcribus can recognize text areas, for instance, in a table, or recognizing the main text, and also that there's marginalia that also need to be transcribed. But when you take the transcription, if you already have an electronic text, then you have to set it up line by line to match the lines in the manuscript, which is a bit of a painstaking process.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think if there aren't any more questions, at least none coming up. So I think we'll close the meeting there. But thank you so much for your questions and your participation. And I'll just on behalf of all of us thank everyone who's made a presentation this evening. And as Chris has said, if any questions do occur, or you've any comments, please do get in touch. Again, well, thanks very much everyone for attending. And for those of you who want to know more, please join Chris next week at 6 p.m. UK time. I know a number of you have already registered. Okay, thank you, and good afternoon if you're in America, and good evening if you're in the UK or Europe. And what are you doing up if you're in Japan or Australia? I mean, goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks to all. Great pleasure.